It's about, I think, how to bring the university more of what we want it to be, and taking some phrases from speaking before, about the re-empowerment of students, and also maybe fiction becomes a reality. I think those were the phrases that came out of the, Sanjay and Massimo's talks that would make sense to this. So, for the last couple of years, I've been occasionally obsessing over Deptford Town Hall. As a self-financed, part-time student with a full-time job and a baby just embarking on a PhD in anthropology, this might not be the smartest choice, as it doesn't have a lot of connection with my proposed studies in Arizona. However, it is this obsession that's kept me sane and has given me an outlet for all the nonsensical hoops that I've been forced to jump through as a postgraduate student. I suppose that this obsession is really what I would propose as the antidote for the university as faceless entity or kind of money-grubbing institution. I've been attempting to approach activism as education. I've been playing with the notion that the university is ultimately the sum of its parts and that students and staff are part of that sum. It seems clear to me that what the university does publicly reflects on the staff and the students of the institution, and it's my endeavour to make the institution more accountable to the people it represents. I've also been building local alliances in order to address national and global issues. So Deptford Town Hall was the local and civic administrative centre of this area up until 1967, when it was all kind of conglomerated into Lewisham. It became the focus for community development projects in the 1980s and 1990s, and it became the property of Goldsmiths College in 1997. Goldsmiths has been in this area for over 100 years, initially as a naval teaching college, then a naval training college, then a teaching college, and more recently in its current incarnation. In that time, it's expanded from its base at the bottom of Lewisham Way, where we are here, down through Lorry Grove and the New Cross Road and over it and further out. It's a substantial property owner in the local area, and it has a lot of local power and influence. But how does it use this power and influence? How much local accountability does the college have? And does the college community have anything to say in this respect? So, in researching about Deptford Town Hall, I found these stories, and I really wanted to tell you the stories because I think they're kind of interesting about the town hall and how it started. So this part's about the architects. Deptford Town Hall is in the Baroque style, popular in the Edwardian period. Architects Lanchester and Rickards compactly designed the building in a limited space available to them on the leftover land purchased for the public baths, which were built in Lorry Grove in 1896. The partners first came into public renown by winning the competition to design Cardiff City Hall and Law Courts in 1897. By the time they came to design Deptford Town Hall, they were the architects of the moment. So they were the, I don't know, who's the current super architects? Richard Rogers or something. They were that, but kind of a bit more young and fruity. Who knows? The partnership went on to design Hull School of Art and the Central Methodist Hall opposite Parliament in Westminster. Rickards was a well-respected draftsman who was keen on decorative sculpture and ornamentation, and if you've seen the building you'll see all that decorative sculpture and ornamentation. Henry Paul, Paul Raphael Montfort and Henry Furr were the sculptors that Rickards employed to complete the facade of Deptford Town Hall, and Lanchester was the organisational mastermind behind the partnership. Now the partnership of Rickards and Lanchester could be a metaphor for Goldsmiths as an institution. Rickards was the quintessential working class lad done good. The son of a Fulham washerwoman, he was apprenticed at 15 and eventually ended up in the same architect's office as SD Adshead, who became a close friend of his. Adshead's description informs us that he was of average, this is Rickards, was of average height, dark, and had an inquiring look and appeared rather aggressive. He was a rebel, out to refute every kind of side. Artistically, he was all emotion and self-centred. He had a natural gift when drawing of continuing all lines with his pencil and in double curves, or as we say, conforming to the line of beauty. Obviously, he's a character that would be easily subsumed into the Goldsmiths tradition. Rickards died in 1920 from wounds that he sustained in the First World War. He'd volunteered to fight and was invalided out in 1916. And at the end of his life, he was unmarried and in his late 40s. There are some implications in the story that Adshead tells that Rickards may have enjoyed a bachelor's lifestyle. Adshead remembers that in their youth the two men would take trips to the country together to paint watercolours. One such trip to the country, Adshead recalls, Rickards never shaved himself and was distracted until he could find a barber. When the village barber was unearthed, Rickards asked him whether he shaved up or down, and then with a puzzled look he said up. Rickards looked as if he might have had his head cut off, as his barber in London shaved down. However, there being no alternative, Rickards passively went through with the operation. Now, Lanchester, in contrast, was from a family of prestigious engineers and architects. His brother had built Britain's first petrol-driven motor car, and he was also the person who first developed the idea of strategic aerial bombing. Lanchester became famous as a town planner and went on to design the Umaid Bhawan Palace in Jodhpur, Rajasthan. This huge palace was supposedly built to provide work for poor villagers in a drought relief project. Some historians argue that the forced labour without money was used to make the building. And today the building causes arguments over its lighting arrangements. It seems that the whole building is lit up like a birthday cake 24/7, but the other less impressive local dwellings are subject to intermittent power supply. So, one is the working class lad come good, the brilliant artist raging against the established order, who died a long lingering death after fighting for his principles in the trenches. There's also a suggestion of the love that could not speak its name, which, with all those sailors and naked mermen, would make Deptford Town Hall one of the country's premier homoerotic monuments. The other, a privileged son of an engineer who developed his organisational skills over time and went on to a number of high-profile commissions in the colonies which exploited slave labour, and who ultimately died a celebrated member of the establishment. So maybe this partnership illustrates the dual nature of our institution. Goldsmiths would take pride in a character like Rickards, as it does with the celebration of celebrities like Blur, Malcolm McLaren and Julian Clary, but would probably keep quiet on the subject of Lanchester. Now, 40 years ago, the student radical Daniel Cohn-Bendit illustrated the inherent problems with formal education in trying to address radical ends, and I think it's something that's probably much worse today. He says, these lectures reduce the student to the role of listener. He's there to record, to remember, to reproduce in exams his lecturer's threadbare arguments, his opinions and styles. The more opportunistic a student is, the more he will ape his teacher's every word, in certain knowledge that his final marks will be high. And Griff Foley argues that currently education in the West is competency-based in order to generate a flexible workforce for restructuring, or what he calls capitalist reorganisation. Educational institutions are not neutral in this process. They serve a capitalist system which has all the flaws of unequal wealth, distribution of wealth, environmental destructiveness and inherent fallibility. If this is the case, then Lanchester is more the typical outcome of the university system than Rickards. But as the story of Lanchester and Rickards demonstrates, I propose that historical reconstruction or narrative construction could be a way for students to break out of this straitjacket of education and could be a basis to form activist action. To make these connections between these characters, their lives and the college involves research, creativity and a radical outlook. So in Connaughton's book, How Societies Remember, he talks about historical reconstruction, and he says about there's a independence of historical reconstruction from social memory, but that historical reconstruction can in important ways receive a guiding impetus and can in turn give significant shape to the memory of social groups. In this case, the social group might be the college community, and it is possible through telling tales to influence how the community remembers the place. So the stories that we tell ourselves about our institution become the dominant stories. Of course, the negative side of this is the state control of memory, as when Lenin and the gang destroyed all the Tsarist statues and replaced them with statues of Marx and Lenin and Trotsky for a little while until they pulled him down. Anyway, Goldsmiths has done its own forced forgetting in the past. It published a centenary account of Goldsmiths in 1991, and it seemed to overlook two really major events in the local area, one being the Battle of Lewisham, which we'll commemorate tomorrow, and the other being the New Cross Fire. both major turning points in race relations in this country, and particularly in respect to policing. It does, however, chronicle events prior to the college's foundation, and a series of other events, including a doodlebug falling on Woolworths in 1944, when the whole college was decamped to Nottingham, so it wasn't even here. But that goes in the book. So, the Deptford fire is glaringly absent. It tells us that what the college administration's relationship would have been with the black community just 15 years ago. But there's a definite link between Deptford's seafaring past, slavery, the African diaspora, racism and education. And in my opinion, it's up to the college to promote this link and make it explicit both locally, nationally and internationally. Although it's par for the course with totalitarian regimes to force forgetting, this year has seen a similar action by our own government in relation to the bicentennial of the abolition of the slave trade in 1807. And I think John was making the point earlier about the statues and what we're supposed to remember about the abolition of the slave trade. Led by Tony Blair, the Wilbur farce has tried to soothe our souls with its celebration of our human warmth and feeling towards enslaved Africans. Tony was clear that he wanted the focus of the commemorations to be on Wilberforce and his friends, the Clapham Saints. The eventual abolition of slavery was not in the majority driven by moral concerns. The figure given credit for the abolitionist movement was evangelical Christian William Wilberforce. Although he presented the bill in the House of Commons that finally saw an end to the slave trade in the UK, he was only one member of a broad coalition of abolitionists, most heavily concentrated in the industrial cities of the north. Although they were able to achieve abolition in the country, it wasn't until 1833 that it was rolled out in the rest of the empire. So Eric Williams, in his own historical reconstruction, examined the Clapham Saints as they were known and discovered few amongst them, well, Clarkson being the most notable exception, who did not have questionable motives or hold disturbing opinions on the matter of enslaved Africans. In 1807, Wilberforce advocated that slavery should be replaced with apprenticeships, i.e. further slavery on the plantations masquerading as freedom. He was a person who preferred moderation and did more to delay the eventual emancipation of enslaved Africans. His fellow abolitionists were a mixture of churchmen like John Wesley and merchants like James Cropper. Cropper was an importer of East India sugar and wanted to level the market by denying the West Indies of their slave labour, and he had less qualms about the importation of slave-produced sugar from Brazil. So, using Deptford Town Hall as the focus for activism around the abolition debate, I've attempted to develop a local campaign that proposed that the college should employ the potent symbolism of the characters on the front of the town hall. And the impetus for this work originally came from a comment that John made about there being a slave ship on top of Deptford Town Hall. A historical reconstruction in itself, but when I looked into the backgrounds of the figures on the front, the slave connections became very apparent. So apologies for people who know this story backwards, but some people may not. So there's four figures on the front of the town hall. One is Sir Francis Drake, one is a bloke called Robert Blake, there's Horatio Nelson, and then there's this character who is like a composite Edwardian admiral. So the story goes like this. Sir Francis Drake is credited with being the first captain to successfully circumnavigate the world. From the brochure that marked the completion of Deptford Town Hall, it said, "It will be remembered that those versed in local history that after his return, the daring navigator from his famous voyage in 1580, Queen Elizabeth came to Deptford and conferred on Sir Francis Drake the honour of knighthood." So we get this idea of a man in puffy pantaloons getting his and he's a bowls player, wasn't he, Francis Drake? And he took his time about fighting the Spanish. But however, it's remembered as only a footnote in most histories that in 1568 John Hawkins, accompanied by his young nephew and protege Francis Drake and bankrolled by Elizabeth I, were able to obtain between 400 and 500 West Africans and sell them in the West Indies. Such were the profits from this arrangement that they were soon repeated with Deptford and its renowned shipyards producing many of the vessels that were used in this commerce. The second figure to appear on the front of the town hall was not so well known outside naval circles. Robert Blake was an admiral who served under Cromwell, and this must be why, post-Restoration, his achievements were not so well reported in popular history books. In a series of naval battles in 1653, he defeated the Dutch Admiral Van Tromp to secure England's monopoly over the Atlantic trade triangle between Europe, West Africa and the Americas. Blake was also the author of the Fighting Instructions, a textbook of naval tactics that were the blueprint for the English Navy's supremacy during the Age of Sail. Cromwell, of course, went on to impose the plantation system in Jamaica after ensuring its utility in Ireland. Our third figure, Horatio Nelson, is England's most celebrated naval hero. He commanded the victory at Trafalgar, seeing off Napoleon's navy and losing his life in the process. There's much civic pride in Deptford for its association with Nelson. Again, the brochure says the date of 1805, being 100 years from, marks that from when the building was built in 1905. Says the date of 1805 accentuates the fact that the present year is the centenary of his death at the Battle of Trafalgar. What is less well known about him is his extreme opposition to the abolition of the slave trade. In reference to William Wilberforce, the chief amongst the abolitionists, he is alleged to have written from the Victory that as long as he could speak and fight, he would resist the damnable doctrines of Wilberforce and his hypocritical allies. So I think Nelson had them pegged. But 5 minutes, great. Yeah, we're going to do it. All right. The final figure on the front of the town hall is the Admiral. There's nothing to pin on the composite, but we can see that at the apex of Pax Britannica in the early part of the 20th century that the British Navy was crucial in the subjugation of numerous peoples and ensured that the Atlas was largely pink and blue. The Royal Naval Dockyards were closed in 1869, ending Deptford's 356-year association as the cradle of the Navy. With the building of Deptford Town Hall, the planners tried to capture the celebrity associated with Deptford's past glories. And in placing the Admiral on the front, they were keen to maintain the link with its Edwardian present. Okay, so as I've demonstrated here, there are at least two ways that these characters can be historically represented. There's the typical representation that casts these guys as naval heroes, and then the other as villains. However, it's the lot of the academic activists that you're serving two masters. I understand that as an academic I should try to be more nuanced in my approach to these characters. Typically they were bad but they also did some good, etc. You know, the tobacco and all sorts of nice things like that. But my activist agenda suggests that these stories are already well known and I need something much more controversial in order to make my point. Sally Angle-Mary makes a similar point in her study of activism in relation to domestic violence. The methods and terms of reference of the academic and the activist are the same, but how they represent their findings are different. The narrative construction differs depending on which hat the individual is wearing. But I'd like to find out, you know, is there a space where these two can come together, where the academy and the activist can, you know, the activist can happen in the same place? Is there, can the academy, where the academy can fully support activism as education, where these two agendas can converge? I like to think that I was able to find this space through academic ritual. In my case, I organised a conference that brought together people who were really apologising for slavery. They stood outside the town hall in chains, saying, you know, I'm so sorry, and, you know, lots of these guys. And they were welcomed into the building, Deptford Town Hall, by the warden. And there was discussion about enslaved African resistance to slavery, and there was some serious talk about reparations. The warden hosted it in the town hall. It was an acknowledgement that something needed to be done in respect to the legacy of slavery, and that the college could contribute to this. The activist narrative constructions or historical reconstructions that I'd made went hand in hand with this academic ritual. And again today, I think we're opening up another space for academic activism with the beginning of the Migrating University, a kind of potlatch of educational access and services, you know, we'll give it away for free. And I feel that this ritual begins to go some way to addressing the inequalities of the access to education in Goldsmiths and kind of more broadly at the university. So thank you.
Thank you all for speaking. We're going to open it up now and do a discussion and have a chance to dialogue. So I don't know if anybody has any questions that I'm dying to ask. Jump in there.
First
start, because I want to try to get a discussion between the papers. And because I'm sitting here fielding phone calls from the college about the banner that we put on the front fence. now I acknowledge, and for a long time we've talked about the town hall as being the front door of the wall of the fortress of Goldsmiths. Mm-hmm. I'm really interested in enclosures and the way in which in this location, New Cross Fire and Lewisham 77, we're in this situation where there is a wall, there is a divide, there's a civil war, if you like. Certain opportunities for some are not opportunities for others, and that's the engagement. So I wonder if we can start to talk about the way in which what Paul was saying with activism and what's happening with the wall and our intervention and putting a banner on the wall, and that being such a point at which, you know, like a hinge point at which these contradictions start to become more visible, is something we can't develop and organise around. The wall is the border, is the fence, is the side of, you've got to draw lines for a civil war. But what's interesting about what happened with that conference and some of the conference, the one on Wilberforce and so on, was kind of naff, and some of it was fantastic. Right? It was a contradictory thing, and like all those things. What was important, I think, getting the warden to speak and so on, is the process of kind of punching holes through the wall. Now, I think all borders, in some ways, are porous. They're designed by the state, but they're designed by the state after and on top of the places that are enclosed in people's lives and so on. And what we need to think through, and I think this really goes to what we'd like to do here and next week, is how we can help people through these porous moments that we can make in these walls and down. But that doesn't strike me as being enough. So I want to throw that back to the two of you to think about, because you know we still live in, however much UEL or Goldsmiths to a much lesser extent might be a black university. We're talking about a racist society, a racist organisation, and as Ash was pointing out, it's black students and the staff. Yeah, I want to say something like it's not sufficient, but we need to talk through the ways in which we dismantle the wall. I'm not trying to do some kind of Joshua thing or Pink Floyd.